Good morning and welcome to another episode of Meatpacking Unpacked, Community Connected, brought to you by the Meatpacking District. My name is Jeffrey LeFrancois and I'm the Executive Director of the Meatpacking Business Improvement District. And in an effort to bring a semblance of normalcy when I got ready this morning, habit had me put on cologne even though I'm sitting here at home right now. Meatpacking Unpacked, our new thought leadership series, will bring you conversations from the Meatpacking District and the city's cultural, political, and business worlds. We paused programming the past 2 weeks given the civil unrest that's taking place in the city and across our country in the name of the Black Lives Matter movement. The murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and far too many others are reprehensible, and the rage that many are feeling is right and justified. Every peaceful protest is necessary because Black Lives Matter. Unfortunately, we witnessed protests against police brutality be met with more police brutality. Over 20 of the Meatpacking District's businesses were looted or vandalized while on the verge of reopening. And we cannot let the havoc wreaked by actors unrelated to the powerful protests seen throughout our city undermine the arc of history on its bend towards justice. We're figuring out as an organization how to do more, and to that end, continuing to ensure that a diversity of voices will be a part of our programming. Today, I'm joined by Jerika Richardson, the Senior Advisor and Secretary to the Board of the nation's largest independent police oversight agency, the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. She focuses on strategy, public education, and engagement, serving as liaison for the board and deputy executive director for the agency. Previously, Ms. Richardson was chief of staff in the office of the counsel to the mayor of the city of New York, where she supervised a team charged with handling city hall legal matters and a policy portfolio devoted to equity, access, and diversity issues. Ms. Richardson is also a member of Manhattan Community Board 10 in Central Harlem, where she serves as vice chair of the Arts and Culture Committee. And she's also on the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Advisory Committee on Cultural Engagement. She's a regular on TV and radio programs providing political commentary, and in 2015 was named a 40 Under 40 Rising Star by City and State magazine. So given the state of the city and the responsibilities of your job, Jerika, it's a real honor and privilege to have you as a guest today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about today's conversation and look forward to answering any questions that you all have.
Great, thank you. For starters, broadly speaking, I think the Civilian Complaint Review Board, CCRB, a lot of folks don't know what it is. So broadly speaking, give us sort of an overview of the agency.
As you mentioned earlier, we are the largest independent, all-civilian oversight body in the nation. I think it's really interesting that we're having this conversation at this time because the CCRB really was established as a result of riots that occurred in Tompkins Square Park after there was interactions between law enforcement and civilians. And that happened in the late 80s. And after that incident, really community leaders, everyday New Yorkers, advocates, and activists all came together and really pushed our elected officials and government officials here in New York City to establish an independent oversight agency for the NYPD. At the time, any incidents would have been investigated by the NYPD themselves. So I think where we are right now is just critical. The work we do is meant for this moment, is meant for this time. And we actually became into power under the leadership of the city's first African-American mayor, Mayor David Dinkins.
And you said it is a completely civilian board. Mm-hmm. So those are appointments provided to that, or to folks are appointed to the board. Is that what it's made up of from just communities across the city?
Exactly. So we have 5 mayoral designees, or 5 mayoral appointees. We have 5 city council appointees, and we have 3 appointees that the mayor appoints, but they are designated by the police commissioner. Recently in November, though, New Yorkers all came together and voted on ballot proposal 2, which was designed to strengthen the CCRB. And now we will have an appointee from the public advocate, and the city council speaker and the mayor will jointly appoint the chair. But when we're talking about the city council designees or appointees, excuse me, there's a lot of thought and effort put into it. And so there's someone representing every single borough. The members of our board, our chair is currently a member of clergy, but the members of our board range from activists and lawyers to academics. It pretty much runs the gamut. And we work really hard to make sure that appointees really reflect the diversity of New York City.
Which is the best thing any agency can do for the city of New York, sort of no matter their purview, because of the type of place that we are. So you, there's a board, and then there's the whole staff, right, that does all this investigating. Walk us through sort of what that's like. Obviously, it's a busy time, and cases must be coming in, left and right. So how does all that get determined?
So we, over the past few weeks, or actually the past week and a half or so, we've had almost 800 complaints related to the protests that are happening across the city. One of the things I think it's important to note when we're talking about the CCRB is to clarify what our jurisdiction actually is. And so the types of allegations of police misconduct that we investigate are force, so that anything that we believe to be excessive and unnecessary for the moment, abuse of authority, which could be something as small as an officer, covering his name and shield, his badge number, or not providing that information when asked. The other allegation type that we look at is discourtesy. So any discourteous language, or, say you're asked to turn in, show your ID or ask for your driver's license, for someone to take it and throw it on the ground, that would be seen as discourteous. And then also offensive language. So any language that targets or talks about a person's race, their ethnicity, their class, their sexual orientation, or disability status. So those are the types of complaints that we look at. And as we mentioned before, we do have an all-civilian board, but we also have an all-civilian staff. And our independent investigators really are charged with investigating the complaints that come in. They work to gather video evidence. Obviously, what we're seeing now is there's a lot of video evidence coming in from civilians and information that's being shared on TV and social media. So they will look at that, but they also have access and subpoena power. So if there was a local business that might have a video camera, or the cameras that we have just outside that's part of the city's infrastructure, they have access to that footage. And they also have access to the body-worn camera footage that officers in New York City are now required to wear. So they would interview the victim involved, they would interview witnesses, civilians involved, people that share information about the incident. They would also interview the officer. And our goal really, and our job and our charge is really to be an impartial investigative body, and really to go where the facts lead us. And then those investigators, and the investigator would share his report with his supervisor, share all the evidence collected, and that would be passed along to the board. At this time, we usually have one representative from each group that I talked about before. So a city council appointee, a mayoral appointee, and a police commissioner designee would all review the footage, the case, the officer's history, as well as a report that the investigator put together, and take a look at the patrol guide and the law here in New York State, as well as the Constitution, to review and see if any of the misconduct that has been alleged is a violation of those laws. And once they make a determination whether to substantiate those charges or unsubstantiate, meaning they were not able, the evidence was not clear enough to make a final determination, or they can exonerate the officer, because although the conduct that the officer engaged in, if the conduct the officer engaged in was actually legal and fine by the law, then that officer would be exonerated. And then there are sometimes we have cases where there's unfounded, meaning there just is not enough, or there are cases where it's unfounded, and officers what the civilian said happened actually did not happen based on the evidence. But when that case is substantiated, meaning what the civilian and what the witnesses said happened actually did happen, and it was a violation of the law, misconduct occurred, then we make recommendations for discipline. That can range from anything from training to termination from the department. And I think one of the things that is really critical and special about the Civilian Complaint Review Board here in New York City is we're the only body in the nation that has the power to administratively prosecute an officer.
I was wondering if there was prosecutorial power and if that is part of the recommendation that, that could come from the stoop, because the unique perspective that you guys have outside of a courtroom doing all this research. And so part of the recommendation could be to go to court basically and prosecute accordingly, right?
Right. And so our charges are disciplinary. So it's administrative. So one of the things that's important for civilians in New York City to note is that you have multiple tools at your disposal. If you have an interaction with law enforcement that you think was improper or resulted in misconduct, for some of the most extreme cases, you can file, we have our district attorneys throughout the city that will actually prosecute from a criminal standpoint. And then civilians also have the recourse to sue the city, to sue the department, to sue the officer involved. And so they have that resource. But what we do here at the CCRB is our work actually impacts an officer's standing within the department. So meaning that they did not uphold their duty to serve and protect. They violated the patrol guide that is supposed to be their code of conduct. And what can happen is an officer can be terminated, an officer can be reprimanded, they could be sent back to the academy for training. So there's a whole host of disciplinary measures, and our board recommends discipline according to the type of misconduct that occurred. I think one of the things that is important to note when we think about how all of this works is thinking about the Eric Garner case here in New York City that happened in Staten Island, I think almost 6 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
The district attorney's office at that time did not move forward, and there was no indictment returned. So there were no criminal charges at that level. The Justice Department investigated for quite some time. And then 2 days after the 5-year anniversary of his death, of Mr. Garner's death, decided not to move forward. But the CCRB, we had our independent investigation at the time. And in 2017, several years earlier, our board reviewed all the evidence at hand and decided to file charges in that case. Ultimately, in 2019, in the fall of 2019, we were able to move forward with our prosecution, in the spring of 2019. And in the fall of 2019, as a result of our independent investigation and our independent prosecution, the officer was terminated from the department. So there's a lot more work that we have to do really to address police accountability across this country and in New York City. But I really think that having the additional oversight of all civilian boards in jurisdictions and increasing and strengthening their powers so that they do have prosecutorial powers and subpoena powers will go a long way in creating an added check on interactions between law enforcement and the community.
Checks and balance. I mean, it's a huge part of the foundation of the way this country was structured. And to think that a check isn't in place already in every city, but that we have it here is important. You mentioned, accountability, and I can't, obviously we can't get into specific cases outside of ones that have, been made public, but can you think of examples that shouldn't be within police purview for enforcement or, consideration on the route to making relationships be better in communities with law enforcement? Can you think of things that just shouldn't be, or ideas, frankly, just shouldn't be in the police portfolio of enforcement, of forcing people in that regard? This is something I've been thinking about. So I'm curious, given your background, if you've given thought to any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we saw with COVID-19 here in New York City is initially there was a move to having law enforcement enforce social distancing, the wearing of masks. These are, a lot of these issues that we're dealing with are really public health issues. And I think we have put our community and officers, quite frankly, in a challenging situation when they're asked to do something that they have not been trained to do. They really often sometimes have not had the resources to do. And I think what it leads to in a time where I think everybody is very stressed, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of concern going on with this pandemic. I think it unfortunately put the community and sometimes law enforcement at odds in a way that was not healthy to creating a better and more trust between police and the communities they serve. So those are some of the things I think we need to think about. And I think we need to also, times are changing. New York City has been one of the safest big cities in America for quite some time. I think the model that was used in the past to deal with crime just really doesn't work in a time where crime is down across the country for the most part. And the militarization that has sometimes happened and occurred and plagued our police forces just really isn't a model that comports with where we are today and where we are in society. I really think there needs to be a serious conversation about how we invest in social services, support services, youth activities, businesses. Like, those are the things that we need to be, I think, investing a lot more of our time, our energy, and our resources into that. And we need to rethink the culture of policing. I think one of the things that I've learned over my tenure in government, but also when I was a journalist covering these issues, was there really needs to be a culture change. We find that obviously in any profession, there are some bad apples, but it's so serious when you're looking at law enforcement because essentially they have people's lives in their hands. And so we need to push for accountability, but we also need to really look at who we are bringing into law enforcement. What backgrounds they have. We should be training people on decision-making, de-escalating situations, really having law enforcement be the resource for people when they're in need. That I think as kids growing up was the messaging that we were told. And we really just need to, I think, work more on having a more community policing dialogue.
I think there's three words that really stood out, or three sort of titles that stood out in what you just talked about there. We talked about police, we talked about the military, and I always think of sort of soldiers, and there's been a big discussion around the police and the difference of what a soldier is in the military, and then law enforcement as a whole. And if law enforcement is the umbrella that police work under, well, we certainly should have other avenues of folks that work under law enforcement. And police are being asked to respond to folks who have mental health issues right now, who are homeless, and their training is inadequate in that regard. So a big part of what's being talked about, and I think it comes from this cultural shift.
Yes.
Can you see the CCRB playing any role in making recommendations around that? I mean, is that within the purview of our agency ever to say, okay, maybe it shouldn't just be a bread and butter cop that shows up to a scene, but the police needs to start, bringing social workers onto their payroll and folding that into the umbrella of what is known as the NYPD. Is that something that's within the purview kind of recommendations of CCRB?
So we do actually have a policy and advocacy unit, which reports to me, and we definitely look at our work as not only giving the world and the city a view of what's happening day in and day out on the ground, but looking at what some of the challenges are, looking at some of the issues that we're seeing coming out of these interactions with law enforcement, and making recommendations to the department, but also making recommendations to our elected officials in the broader community about things that should change. Recently this week, we released our first ever report on young people and policing. And so one of the things we did in order to get a better sense of what interactions between police and young people are looking like is we actually spoke to the young people themselves. Like, we created a youth advisory council. We launched it in 2018. And in 2019, we had our first ever youth summit on policing, where we brought practitioners, where we brought community leaders, where we brought youth groups and young people together. And our youth advisory council actually came up with the conversation, the panels. They picked panelists. We brought all representatives from all the district attorney's offices in. We brought in folks who work in Cure Violence Group, YMCAs, charter schools, public schools, you name it. We had everyone there at the table, and we wanted them to hear directly from young people. We invited the NYPD, so their community affairs, the head of their community affairs was there. We polled the young people about what their interactions are like, what's positive, what's working well, what some of the challenges are. And as a result, from the data that we receive with our complaints, but also hearing these stories from young people, we're able to put together a youth report with comprehensive reforms, not only for the police department, but also for the CCRB. And one of those recommendations was really trying to drill down on how we can reach out to young people in a very meaningful way. So we launched our first ever public service announcement with this year's Youth Advisory Council. And Emerald Garner, the daughter of Eric Garner, participated in that as a young person to be able to talk about the resource that CCRB could provide. One of the key findings that I think came out of the report as far as recommendations that we had for the department was that through the complaints that we saw, we found that a lot of times law enforcement, police officers were arresting young people and not notifying their parents. So that is one of the things. How can a parent advocate for their child? These are minors that we're talking about. And the notification process was either not happening, or it was, here or there, depending on which precinct you were dealing with. So one of the recommendations was changing the patrol guide to make that notification more prominent and more clear, recommending to them that they need to rework their training so that officers notifying parents is the first thing they're thinking of when they're interacting with their young people. But I mean, the work we do is really important. You talked about mental health. That is one of the things we have really been pushing for, so that any civilian that walks in our door will be able to be connected to services that they may need, whether it's benefits, whether they might be a victim of domestic violence and they have housing issues. What every city agency we think really should be working to do is to support the entire individual, because we know these experiences and interactions can be traumatizing, and they can also have consequences and repercussions that impact the rest of your life, whether it's, do you have support for your children when you need to go to court, all of those things. So we need to be thinking, I think, throughout the city, not just with the department, to make sure that we are supporting every member of this community in any way, shape, or form that we can, and connecting to them to the resources that they need.
It was a really powerful PSA. So congratulations on that being released. I think and that it wasn't just done overnight. You said that the Youth Council has been in effect for 2 years, and this is sort of a big result of that. So I hope that is a first, and that it continues to evolve for the agency and for the city, sort of for the better. George Floyd was not from New York City. Breonna Taylor, not from New York City. We've had our unfortunate number of Black people killed by the police. But why do you think this time the fire's bigger? What's different? Why is the outrage bigger this time? Do you have any sense of that or thoughts to share on that?
Well, I don't know if the outrage is bigger. I think what we've seen is incident after incident that is kind of building up with people. And then we came to a moment where you had everyone across the country for probably the first time in generations, locked down in home. We didn't have sports. We don't have a lot of the entertainment things. And I think people really have been focused on what's going on and what's happening in this country. And so they're watching TV and they're reading the paper and seeing social media, and they're just seeing, it seems like, one incident after the other. And I think it really just hit a boiling point. And I think there were no other distractions at the time that could, I think, make what was happening in our society around social justice there's no distraction from that. I think it was abundantly clear. And I think people just had the time to just focus on this one thing. And I feel like people are saying they're tired, enough is enough. Something has got to change. We've got to do more to support everyone in this community, but especially of members of the Black community and the Brown community that we've seen over and over and over, really having these terrible exchanges that are sometimes resulting in death.
Thank you for that. Okay, I want to shift a little bit to a little bit lighter, more local things, if that's okay with you. You're on your local community board, CV10 in Harlem. I'm on my local community board, actually, CV4 in Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen. So I lived in Harlem for 8 years. So I have like a real soft spot, and I love that community. What do you love about it? First of all, how long have you been on the board? And then what do you love about being on your community board?
So I've been on the board for a little over 2 years. I just love the opportunity to connect with so many people from so many different backgrounds and like really work together on improving our community, whether that's like advocating for, small businesses in the area, working with young people, working to, improve our parks and create landmarks. Because I think, New York City is just such a iconic and historic city, period. But for me to live in Harlem, there's just so much rich history here. So that's been amazing. And, Harlem is, I think, special and, very well known for all of its arts and culture. And so I feel it a privilege to be able to serve as vice chair of the Arts and Culture Committee. And I just want to make all of that work and all that creativity accessible to folks throughout the city, but also beyond. And I will say that this moment that we're living in and the creativity that we've had to come up with in order to share all of these things, whether it's the Zoom or, the digital, digital meetings and Facebook, just using all of our social media to bring that to the rest of the world, I think is really is incredible. And I think a really fun time as far as helping us think outside our box and how we share.
Absolutely. And I mean, you clearly have a thread of art running through your portfolio, and the Metropolitan Museum committee that you serve on, the Cultural Engagement Committee. What is that?
Mm-hmm. Really, it's a committee that's all about how we can make art and the work that they're doing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art accessible to the broader community, and how we can engage with different community groups and different diverse audiences and really make the museum a space where people can convene and really can enjoy all that New York City has to offer. I mean, the Metropolitan Museum is one of the prominent museums in the world. And, unfortunately, you might have someone that lives in New York City that just never has been able to attend or, walk the halls. And we really want to make that accessible to every New Yorker. And so obviously during this time, there's been a push to do viewings remotely and to bring performance artists in and just really engage the community so that they're able to enjoy, I think, this jewel that we have here in New York City.
That's fantastic. I think it's wonderful that that committee exists and that you're on it also. Okay, so now I have a fire round of questions to get a little bit, to know a little bit about Jerika, just a little bit. We're New Yorkers, we've got to know a little bit about each other. So, egg and cheese or bagel with cream cheese?
Oh, I think bagel with cream cheese.
Okay. Favorite color?
Yellow.
Cocktail or wine?
Wine, definitely.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Vacation choice, middle of nowhere or exploring a new city?
Middle of nowhere.
Good for you. We all need that right now.
I could use that, yes, definitely.
Yeah. And then an art question, Kara Walker or Jean-Michel Basquiat?
Oh, Basquiat all day.
Oh, look at that. I love that reaction. Okay, good. And then my final one is, given that tomorrow is your birthday, so happy early birthday, what dessert might you be indulging on tomorrow?
ice cream cake. I am lactose intolerant, but once a year I have to have it.
That is, that's a perfect answer. This was delightful. I really appreciate your time today. Is there anything else you want to add or share with us before we wrap up?
Well, thank you so much for making the time and really opening up this conversation so that more people can know about the work we do here at the CCRB. Definitely, I hope you'll be able to share our contact information later, but I just wanted to, while I have everyone here, to let folks know that there's a number of ways they can reach us. They can call 311, which is the easiest to remember, but they can also call our hotline, which is 1-800-341-CCRB. Again, that's 1-800-341-CCRB. And then you can also go to our website and file a complaint there, which is nyc.gov/CCRB complaint. But I just want New Yorkers to know that we're a resource. We're here for them if they need us.
Well, thank you for that. We really appreciate it. It's been great to have you today. Next week on Meatpacking Unpacked, you can join us for another conversation, this time with the Executive Director of the LGBT Center, Glenda Testone. June is Pride Month, and it's important to know and recall that Pride started as a riot against police misconduct and police mistreatment. So don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned to hear from us more about what's going on in the district and across the city through our cast of characters. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.